Since the release of the massive patch 1.1 Earl Grey to Victoria 3, there have been 2 game updates since. Unfortunately for me, I've been stuck with C19, but for you, you're lucky. That means 2 things. Firstly, you get to listen to my sick voice, and secondly, we're going to cover off 2 updates in one. The first, I have to admit, wasn't massive. I wouldn't have made a video about it by itself. However, the second patch that dropped today actually added some interesting in-game features, as well as fixing, apparently, a load of things that I know you've been talking about a lot in the comments. So let's jump in and take a look. I'll start with 1.1.1. The small patch, as you can see, it released on Thursday the 8th of December. It was a little while ago. It came out actually only a few days after Earl Grey, and as you can see on screen, it delivered a whole load of not much. AI fixed a bug where the AI broke off a pack to save influence, even when they weren't the ones paying the influence. Idiot! Major bug fixes included fixing an unlocalized Russian custom lock string. Yep. And then there were other major bug fixes as well. Put that one there twice, just for good show. You can see it fixed a bug that caused morale loss, regressive political movements to be much more common than progressive ones, and a random crash on startup. Some of these absolutely will affect you, and they're worth thinking about, but they're not massive. They're not game-changing. That all changed this morning, though, when Victoria 3 released an additional patch. On Wednesday the 14th of December, as you can see, 1.1.1 was followed up by, you guessed it, 1.1.2. But don't let the decimals and the Roman numerals bore you, because in this one we actually did see some changes to the game, balance and features. I'll show you them on screen with some spicy African gameplay in the background, new of course, and we'll cover them off now. Firstly, we have one new feature, and it's a small feature, but it's a really nice quality of life improvement. Honestly, it'll save you a lot of time if you're like me, moving political parties left, right, left, right, left, right to try and get your government just right. Following the changes to legitimacy that were added in patch 1.1, we now have, if you don't know, proper impacts for the legitimacy system. If your government is in the bottom tier, you won't be able to pass laws. At the top, you'll be really damn good at it. And everywhere in between kind of punishes opposition a little bit, or removes their power, adding more power to the parties that should have it. Now, as you can see, there's a new feature that adds a quick select option for the 3 most legitimate, valid government combinations on the Reform Government panel. This saves us time from swapping things around, but more importantly, it'll show you easy, quick, simple makeups that you can get to have your legitimacy as high as possible, and which parties will be in. This is a nice quality of life change. And over on the balance side, there are some changes to help this as well, because there were some glaring issues with that legitimacy system. The main one being that you could, at least in the early game, maybe you weren't a democracy, well, you definitely weren't a democracy, where the impact of the government was a little bit sketchy. It was really easy to just throw everybody in and win. This carried through the game as well, but it was particularly noticeable early on. Over on the balance changes, they've made it so it's no longer possible to reliably max out legitimacy by throwing every interest group into government together. Thank goodness. Legitimacy penalty from conflicting government ideologies is now calculated by determining for each law group the law with the strongest compound feelings for or against it across all interest groups in government, ensuring every additional interest group potentially increases the ideological incoherence. What this is saying in a nutshell is it should be much more difficult for you to put in political parties that are polar opposites and have them just sort of magically agree to pass laws. This is the second piece of that puzzle where you could just throw everybody in together and pass laws. They've addressed it twofold in these first 2 changes, by making it no longer possible to just throw everybody in and have max, but then also delving into the detail a little bit more here, as you can see. And essentially what they're trying to do is make it so that there'll be more of a penalty for having really conflicting ideologies around the table. It makes sense. There are 2 more tweaks, or at least one significant one, to the legitimacy of the government, and here you can see it, it's the 3rd one on screen. The legitimacy penalty from the size of the government has been reintroduced, so now larger governments will have a penalty. Again, an important piece of this puzzle, but in the form of a number of allowed interest groups or parties in government with no penalty, and a flat penalty for each entity in addition to that. So basically, you'll be able to put in a certain number of parties for free, and once you start really stacking and racking them, you'll pay an additional penalty. Seems to make sense. In my early testing, it works. I would love your feedback below. You're always fantastic at giving it, even if it's not quite related to what we're talking about in the video. But regardless, I love to hear it, so do let me know. There are 2 changes coming to the balance for those angry interest groups. I love Victoria too, they shout. Angry interest groups can now be invited to the government and will not leave the government voluntarily. Unless insurrectionally. Yep, nice word. And also, angry interest groups in government can now join political movements. So this is a little bit of a change. Angry groups within government can form government and also fight against you, arguably making them more significant. You used to be able to sort of ring fence them and pin them off into opposition, maybe push them to one side. Now they should have more prominence. Finally, on the balance front, insurrectionary interest groups in a government party will now leave the government and the party, unless it's the last interest group, in which case they're insurrecting against themselves, I suppose. And finally, the number of provinces won in smaller theatres with large numbers of defending mobilised battalions is now reduced, ensuring they take more battles to wipe them out entirely. Slightly different from the rest of the balance changes, but hopefully just as significant. Often as we move into the last sections, the AI and the bug fixes, it's kind of like, oh, you know, we fix this, we fix that. It's not particularly relatable to most players a lot of the time, at least many of the points. In this case, though, I think you'll be quite pleased, particularly on the bug fixes. Let's look at the AI first, though. They fixed a bug, that prevented the AI from sending their mobilized generals to fronts under certain conditions. Seems like a good thing. They also improved its ability to make smart investments in port in the late game and manage their total number of ports across a market. And finally, it increased the priority of the AI for building ports, so we should see a better connected AI. Finally, though, on the bug fixes front, the first one is by far and away the most important, the first few. They ensured that overseas generals will not travel to their home headquarters if their front is resolved or invalidated. Generals whose front has been resolved or become invalid should now always travel to the closest active front to continue their campaign, even if the front is overseas. If no valid front exists, the general should remain on standby in the overseas headquarters, unless manually recalled home. And then on the second point here, in case you can't quite see where this is going, let's spell it out for you. Fixed a case of generals skipping travelling time and teleporting home if their source front's position is unknown. There are a variety of other fixes here as well. A high legitimacy level would increase radicals instead of loyalists. Tweaked that. Out of sync shipping lanes. Tweaked. Console commands. Flickering on the map. Market interaction and some tooltips in Japanese. But the most important one is that first one at the top. An issue that many have rightly called out has been the ability to effectively, if you want to, it is largely a player choice, teleport your armies across the map. This seems to have tried to fix that. Will it fix it in its entirety? I don't know. Obviously, we'll have to plan out to test it. I will sit on the fence for now and see where that lands. I'm not fully confident it'll entirely fix it. However, it looks really promising. Again, this is one of those things that will need a little bit of testing, so do let me know. And thank you for joining me today, covering off 2 patch updates to Victoria 3. I have been sick for the last week, but I'm starting to feel a bit better now. And tomorrow, I believe, is the last Dev Diary of the year. Developer Diary 70 will be coming out for Victoria 3. So you'll probably see me then, where I imagine we'll hear about some more spicy things and probably wrap up the Victoria 3 news cycle for the year, or the 2 months. My goodness, it's been a fast 2 months. Thanks for watching. I'll see you then.